It's Tuesday, it's midday, and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha, the co-founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales, and The Telegraph's associate editor, Camilla, who covers politics and the royals. Tonight, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn go head-to-head in the first TV election debate. Will it be the moment the campaign catches fire? Labour's John McDonnell targets the super-rich with this plea to one of Britain's billionaires.
Tell him to come and see me. Tell him to come and have a cup of tea with me.
Will you go and have a cup of tea with him, John?
I certainly would, because it would be very interesting to see if I could put my point of view forward.
Also, the Green Party of England and Wales have launched their election manifesto.
This is the last election where we can take the first step down the right path, and that is what we must do.
And are British Indians turning their backs on the Labour Party?
You're a Labour Party member?
Yes.
You're not going to vote Labour?
No.
Let's start with Prince Andrew, still on the front pages of most of today's newspapers as the fallout from his Newsnight interview continues unabated. It seems now that various businesses are reconsidering or reviewing their support for his business scheme Picture Palace. The founding sponsor of the scheme, KPMG, has pulled out, although they said they'd made that decision before the interview was broadcast.
I would agree with that, actually, and I think lots of, he's a patron of a lot of charities. You saw the NSPCC already distance themselves from him back in August. I think as charities, these are decisions that have to be taken at a board level, so it's not a case of immediate reaction, but I think over the next kind of 2-3 weeks you will see more charities distance themselves, and then I think Buckingham Palace's line that this interview doesn't affect kind of Prince Andrew's royal duties going forward becomes increasingly harder to hold. And, I am sure lots of other people watching that interview on Saturday night were pretty shocked, actually, with some of the things that Prince Andrew came out and said. So I completely understand why charities who are there to support children feel like they now have to distance themselves from them.
Under laws dating back 10 or 15 years, they can get released halfway through their sentence. We're going to move that release trigger back to 2/3 of their sentence, so the most serious criminals spend more of their sentence in prison. That's what the public expect. They expect serious criminals to be kept off the streets, and that's what we're going to do.
This will be welcomed by voters, won't it?
Well, look, politicians have talked about tougher sentencing since the year dot. I think this is a big distraction from the real problems of our criminal justice system. If you look at cuts to policing, cuts to the prosecution service that we've seen over the last decade, it's now taking, sometimes a year, 18 months, 2 years for crimes to go from them being reported to the police to ending up in trial. There are also massive problems with the probation service, cuts there, privatisation, that means that it's increasingly difficult for the probation service to keep an eye and to help rehabilitate prisoners who've been released. So this will actually affect quite a small number of offenders. There are already big safeguards built into the system around the parole board. To me, this is just, a headline for voters to try and reassure them that a criminal justice system that's creaking at the seams due to 10 years of underfunding as a result of your government, that you're trying to look tough. But I'm afraid it just doesn't cut it when you look at police cuts.
Well, I wouldn't diminish how seriously parents of children who have been murdered will feel about this. It is extremely important, so I wouldn't diminish it in any way. But on the probation point you made, the probation privatised contracts are now being brought back in-house, so the government will run them directly again. Next year, the probation service is getting a very significant increase in funding. And as part of today's announcements, there's going to be a lot more work done in prisons on education, on rehabilitation, to try and make sure that when prisoners are released, they are more likely to become valuable and constructive members of society. So a lot of work is being done in those areas. You mentioned police, where we're recruiting 20,000 extra police
That's only
officers.
to replace police officers that have already been cut, though. The number of police officers on our streets is the lowest they've been for decades.
Yeah, well, we're recruiting more police officers, as I say. Clearly, 9 years ago, the country was, frankly, going bankrupt. We had to find savings, which we did. It was difficult, but we did the responsible
By cutting
thing.
police numbers, though?
We did the right thing with the responsible thing.
Making it difficult. You know, if you've got a burglary, people are saying that they can't even get the police interested in investigating
And now, after 9 years
crime.
of responsible management, we can spend extra money on police without jeopardising the nation's finances or handing on unaffordable debt to the next generation. So we can, after 9 years of running things properly, we can afford to both invest in police and also be responsible. That's fixing the mess that Labour left behind.
So let me just explain to
office.
people what they're seeing here on our TV screens. It's Boris Johnson at a boxing ring. I'm not sure whether he's actually going to get in the ring with anyone in Manchester there, but as you can see, the cameras are with him on this photo call. He's obviously gearing up for a fight this evening, metaphorically speaking, of course, verbally with Jeremy Corbyn in that TV debate. Sonia, you wanted to respond?
Well, I just want to respond to this point about tax cuts. Actually, the tax cuts to income tax have benefited disproportionately, according to the Resolution Foundation, better off households. That is absolutely true, Chris. No, it's true. It's what their analysis says. They're an independent organisation. And the IFS has said that those, in the Resolution Foundation, that those tax cuts have cost in the region of about £20 billion a year. And this is the problem with Chris's argument earlier, that when it comes to the NHS and the policing, we just had to cut police numbers by 20,000 because we couldn't afford it. Actually, it was a political choice. Conservative chancellors over the years have delivered expensive income tax cuts that have benefited more affluent families, and the price has been fewer police on the streets, the NHS crimping at the seams.
Those tax cuts were targeted disproportionately at lower income people because somebody working part-time, let's say...
No, but if you look at the distributional analysis, it shows that the benefits flow disproportionately to better off households.
Somebody working part-time, earning, say, £12,000 a year, now pays no income tax whatsoever, and we've increased the minimum wage from £5.93 to £8.21, an enormous...
That doesn't account for cuts in tax
here because I want to show Chris has been to Leicester.
This is a city with one of the largest British Indian populations in the UK, and the reason that we've come here is this. It's a statement that's raised a few eyebrows from the Labour Friends of India, complaining that of the 39 safe Labour seats in this election, just one candidate of Indian heritage has been chosen. But it also goes further than that. It says relations between the Indian community and the Labour Party are already strained. So we're going to try and find out a bit more about what's going on. Greg, nice to meet you. You're right.
Greg.
Thanks very much for coming along.
Yeah, pleasure. Good. You got quite slight, haven't you?
Yeah, we're just filming this wedding. We've come to meet Sundip Meghani, a former Leicester councillor who was hoping to be standing for election next month. He applied to be Labour candidate for Leicester East, but lost out to this woman. Claudia Webb, Leicester-born, now an Islington councillor, close ally of Jeremy Corbyn, a member of Labour's ruling National Executive Committee.
This is my city. These are my people. I am of Indian Gujarati heritage myself, and I've been a Labour Party activist and member for more than half my life.
Did you get any notification from the party that you hadn't been selected? An email, a phone call?
No, not a single thing. Not a phone call, not an email. I certainly wasn't interviewed in any way, and neither were the other Asian candidates that applied, from what I hear. And I found out that Claudia Webb had been selected on Twitter.
In our conference, we have an emergency motion on Kashmir.
Adding to the anger over Claudia Webb's selection is the fact she chaired proceedings at Labour's conference when a motion was put to delegates criticising India's actions in Kashmir, claiming there was a humanitarian crisis.
Freedom for Kashmir.
And now she has the audacity to want to stand up for, what, the Indian community in Leicester?
Is this just you being bitter that you didn't get chosen? I mean, if I go anywhere else in Leicester, are they going to say the same thing?
Go to Belgrave Road, for instance. We think of it as Little India here in Leicester. Amazing place, and I love it. Go and speak to people there.
BBC Radio Leicester.
So based on Sundip's advice, we're going to head to the Belgrave Road in Leicester, which is home to a large Hindu population, to see what they think.
In the general election.
Dharmesh Lakhani is a long-time Labour member and owns a restaurant on the Belgrave Road.
But I know other city councillors who applied, they didn't get an interview. This You know, our candidate was railroaded, and you know, the majority, the 22,000 majority Labour hold in this constituency is being taken for granted.
Like many British Indians here, Dharmesh's phone has been bombarded by viral WhatsApp messages warning him not to vote Labour.
I've actually got a message from a cousin of mine in Canada.
Can we take a look?
Yeah. He's wrote down, please forward to as many Indians in the UK as possible, so you vote Labour out.
Recognising the backlash caused by that Kashmir motion, Labour has subsequently clarified its position, insisting it's a matter between India and Pakistan, and the party won't interfere.
Do you think that will repair the damage?
No, a bit late. Secondly, why did they do it in the first place? There are reasons why they did it, and I'm sorry, you can't turn back something like that and expect everybody to jump back on board.
And despite those complaints about Claudia Webb's nomination, it is worth reflecting that she says that she's born and bred in Leicester and her family still live here in the Leicester East constituency, and she's excited to represent this place if she gets elected. The Labour Party say any claim Claudia Webb was railroaded into the seat is untrue, and the panel conducting the selection included regional and local constituency representatives. It says it's proud to have more MPs of Indian descent than any other party. So we have been on this road a good few hours this afternoon. I've been going in and out of the shops, speaking to people. Some of them don't want to go on camera, but there's definitely a common theme that people are annoyed with Labour and think that they've made a mistake and that they've taken this community for granted, and some who say that they won't vote for them this time. You're a Labour Party member?
Yes.
You're not going to vote Labour?
Nope.
You can't stay in the party then, can you?
That is correct. So my direct debit will be cancelled.
How do you feel about that?
Angry, frustrated, slightly hurt, but such is the world. The world has to move on.
And we'll be speaking to Labour's Annalise Dodds later in the programme. Just to let you know as well that apart from Claudia Webb standing for the Labour Party, 5 other candidates are also standing for election to be Leicester East's next MP. You can see their names there on your screens. Greg Dawson, the reporter in that film, is here with us. Can you bring us up to date with what's happened?
Yep, so after we got back from Leicester to make that film, we then got word that the chair of the Leicester East constituency Labour Party had resigned from the party. I gave him a call last night to confirm that, and he's written this letter, which I believe we can see, excoriating really, saying, I've spent 30 years of my life working for a party that I now know I have nothing in common with. This is not the party I joined, the party for decent working people. I can no longer follow the clown that leads the Labour Party, obviously a reference to Jeremy Corbyn. Now, clearly there are a number of factors here of why he decided to do this. He said he's been loyal to the Leicester East MP Keith Vaz, but now that Keith Vaz is stepping down, he feels that he can do this. He supports Brexit. He wants a party that will push Brexit through, so he's going to vote Conservative, so he cannot stay in the party. However, he did say on the selection of Claudia Webb it was a fix. So John Thomas has been on camera this morning. We've got a clip of him coming up. He was asked specifically about Labour's claim that the local constituency representatives were involved in the selection process of Claudia Webb. Here's his response.
Well, I've not heard of who that is. So I would be inclined to disbelieve that completely. Because if somebody had been called to a selection meeting in London, Nottingham, wherever, I would have known about it.
Any further response around this from Labour?
Well, Labour have been categoric that, you know, the selection process has been similar in other seats, and it included regional and local constituency representatives. They also stress Claudia Webb was born and grew up in Leicester, and she'll be a great candidate for the region.
Greg, thanks for coming in. Sonia, what do you make of this story? There's clearly quite a lot of anger and concern, particularly in this constituency, from British, Indian and Hindu voters.
There is, and for me, I think this is really a story of stitch-ups and queries that local parties have over stitch-ups. This is not the first time this has happened in this election campaign. There was also some controversy in Bassetlaw around the candidate Sally Gimson, who was removed by Labour's National Executive Committee. They said that complaints had been put in against her, allegations, and the local party there felt very strongly that it was a stitch-up too. Now, Labour leaderships have since time immemorial in selections that happen close to an election used very heavy-handed tactics in order to select candidates. So it's really the central party that's involved, very, very limited role for constituency Labour parties. But Jeremy Corbyn has always said that he's a big fan of local democracy. And I think the feeling would be different locally if Claudia Webb had gone up in front of a meeting of the local constituency party, members had a chance to vote. But like in many selections that have happened close to the election, there's a feeling that the leadership has stitched this up in favour of a candidate that they want to see in Parliament.
But does it go more broadly to a question around British Indians and Hindus in particular feeling alienated by the Labour Party, feeling taken for granted? Out of 39 safe seats, only one candidate has been selected of Indian heritage, and there is upset over this conference motion regarding Kashmir and the right to self-determination. What do you say about that?
Well, I'm very nervous about the idea that somebody who's criticised the actions of an Indian government, say, can't represent an area that has a big Indian population. I'm a British Indian. I would criticise lots about the existing Indian government. So I'm nervous about that kind of stuff. It is true that Labour has historically always been very reliant on the ethnic minority vote, and I think the leadership will be concerned about anything that might sort of start to break that link. But I do think that, criticising the Indian government, just like criticising the government of Pakistan or governments in other areas of the world for actions that, that Labour politicians and members may feel to be wrong, has to be on the table.
As I say, we'll be speaking to Labour's Annalise Dodds
to those
later
seaside
on.
towns, those seaside areas that have been neglected for so long. So it's the way that it all fits together that's important in the Green New Deal.
My question is, so I really support the aspiration of zero carbon by 2030. I think it's very important that we do it. But I'm very sceptical that we can just spend our way to that aspiration. I think we as citizens need to make fundamental changes in our lifestyle that include things like flying less, eating less meat. Spending money isn't going to achieve that. What are your initiatives for getting us to do less of the bad stuff?
So if you're going to do that, you've got two choices. You can either legislate and ban it all, which is not the route we're going down, or you can make the conditions to create the right choices to be made. So if you want people out of their cars, and we don't think just switching to electric cars is the answer either, because it creates pollution, creating the cars will generate massive amounts of carbon. Let's invest in the public transport infrastructure so you can do the commute, so you can do the school run easily, effectively on low-cost public transport that works.
What about flights, though?
Sure, in flights, a frequent fly level, we know that 15% of the flights, 70% of the flights taken by 15% of the people. There's a flying kind of super rich class, which we need to tax to decrease the amount of flights. One flight a year, for example, wouldn't be subject to that.
But how much should they be decreased by? What sort of numbers are we talking about?
So obviously, what you need to do is pilot it. You need to get a gauge for demand, because no one's done this before. So you need to see how the tax would impact behaviour, and you want to phase it in sensibly.
Or is that a rather naive view now, bearing in mind what people are dealing with on a daily basis?
Well, I think it sounds like a very worthy initiative, and I'll be really interested to see where it goes. I think part of the problem is that this culture has started to infect our politics and the way we do politics. So even if you just look at this election campaign, a couple of figures that the Conservatives have put out, the idea that Labour's spending plans would amount to 1.2 trillion over 5 years.
Although isn't that on both sides?
Migration. I mean, to an extent, it happens on both sides, but I was really shocked, actually, by those Tory figures on spending, also saying that Labour's migration policy would see an extra 840,000 people come into the country over net migration. Neither of those figures were based in fact. They were based on policies that aren't Labour policy. So I do think that in an election climate where parties are willing essentially to put out fake news, to make up figures that aren't based in reality, that aren't fair, that aren't what the other party says that it wants to do, I think this problem has started to go beyond the platforms and the way that the platforms work. I think it started to affect our political process.
I mean, for sure, and I think one of the new elements, we've always had politicians who stretch the truth and so forth. We've always had populist campaigns. The thing that's interesting and different is the ability to micro-target people. So they can tell you one thing, they can tell me one thing, they can tell you one thing. They might even contradict each other, and Facebook is willing to take money for political advertising, and they refuse to fact-check it. And I think that's deeply problematic.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. I mean, who would have thought that this would have happened 10 years ago? But the real question is what do we do about this? And I agree with Camilla. We can't let this situation go on where you have these, huge global, essentially publishers of content, but who say we've got absolutely no responsibility for fact checking at all. And if it goes up and it's fake, well, just sorry, there's not very much we can do about it. That's a problem that we've got to tackle.
Well, let's have a look, because you've had a problem with fake Twitter accounts springing up.
I have actually.
You
yes.
forgot. Here it is. Hi, Twitter support. My followers report a third imposter account pretending to be me being set up. I can't seem to view it, so can't report it. Please, can you shut it down ASAP? And what's happened?
Well, it looks like Twitter I had 3 imposter accounts kind of spring up over the weekend, and it looks like Twitter have shut them down, but I'm kind of like anxiously awaiting to see if the person who's setting them up sets up any more. They've not tweeted anything yet, so it's a question about what is it for. But actually it can be really hard with these big companies to get sort of stuff like this sorted out, and sometimes it's only if you're a journalist and you're tweeting them directly that they take action. But actually if you're just, a sort of normal punter, it can be really difficult to get them to
I'm
sit
going
up
to boycott
and
it
take
because
notice.
I think it is absolutely wrong that Joe Swinson is not invited to participate.
Right, and there was the court case, but in fact they lost it, both the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. How big a gamble?
I think it's a big gamble for Boris Johnson. He's got a lot to lose. He's way ahead in the polls. For Jeremy Corbyn, I think expectations are pretty low going in, actually. So if he performs well, that could only be a positive for him.
Well, I'll be watching this evening. That won't come as any great surprise to anybody. But from all of us here, have a very good afternoon, and we'll be back tomorrow at the same time.